And now I'll turn us over to Bishop Fisher for our opening prayer.
Let us pray. Creator, we give you thanks for all you are and all you bring to us for our visit within your creation. In Jesus, you place the gospel in the center of the sacred circle through which all of creation is related. You show us the way to live a generous and compassionate life. Give us your strength to live together with respect and commitment as we grow in your spirit. For you are God, now and forever.
Amen.
Well, it's an honor to welcome Michael and Forrest here. I'll read you a little of their bio, but I also want to thank Vicki, who has had this speaker series really throughout COVID, and she's just brought us the best presenters. So thank you, Vicki, for all the work you do for this. So Forrest Kutch is a UT elder. He's a retired tribal executive and the former director of Indian Affairs for the state of Utah. Forrest is Bishop's Warden of St. Elizabeth's Episcopal Church in White Rocks, Utah, and he's the editor of The History of Utah's American Indians and narrator of the PBS series, We Shall Remain, the Native History of Utah. Forrest continues to inform the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church on matters that concern Native people. And we also have the Reverend Michael Carney, who has served the people of St. Elizabeth's Episcopal Church in White Rocks, Utah since 2016. He's an active member of the Episcopal Indigenous Ministries community and coordinates the Mountains and Deserts Ministry Coalition. Michael and Forrest presented together at Winter Talk 2022, which is the annual gathering sponsored by the Office of Indigenous Ministries. We are so honored to have you with us to explore Native spirituality and giving. Welcome to Western Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, it's just exciting to be here to get to know you a little bit, share our stories, and have a conversation. Our book is A Native Way of Giving. We were blessed to be able to publish that through Church Publishing last year. And let me offer you a starting point for the conversation. And Forrest, I'll invite you to comment on it. A starting point for us in this way of being in this work is that every day is a gift from the Creator. Every day is a gift from the Creator. Now, I'm a white guy from Sioux City, Iowa, right? I come from the dominant culture. It's kind of interesting to consider how people in the dominant culture would answer the question or fill in the blank. Every day is, I think the most common thing I hear from people is busy. I mean, I'm a church leader. I'm pretty busy. We want to talk about a transformative way of being and of engaging in the world by starting with the idea that every day is a gift from the Creator. Forrest?
Yeah, I think I want to start out with my mother, the influence of my mother, Josephine LaRose. The LaRose name is apparently French, but I don't have much French blood, according to Amnesty.com. But we do have a French surname from my mother, LaRose. But my mother grew up very poor in White Rocks, and she was very thrifty, sometimes too thrifty when she was raising me and my sister. My father, by the way, both my parents were, I shouldn't say victims, I should say probably, they were products of the federal boarding school system. My mother left when she was 9 years old and didn't return until she was 18, and she was sent to the Riverside Indian School, or the Sherman Indian School in Riverside, California. My father went to Albuquerque High School, Indian School. And so they both came back with post-high educations. And my mother, she used to have a saying. She used to tell me, she would say, son, always appreciate what you have and you will always have more. And as I mentioned earlier, she was so thrifty that sometimes she would buy me pants that were on sale and then put them in they would be a couple feet too long. And so she'd put them in a drawer and forget about them. And then I would outgrow them. And so they wouldn't benefit me at all. And so by the time I pulled them out, they were too short for me. So she would do things like that to save money. And I've come to think a little bit of that was trauma. But on the other hand, her wisdom was that we should always appreciate what we have. And what that led to is eventually inheriting some land from my great uncle, Billy Wapanas Chapus. And he left the land to my mother because my mother cared for him. And then it was passed down to me. And what I interpreted that spiritually to mean is that I have been blessed and that I should appreciate that blessing. And so I have, because I knew my great uncle and loved him so much, and I learned so much from him about love and appreciation, I have really taken good care of this land. It's 40 acres of beautiful property. I have 8 horses on it. It has a hay field. It has pastures. It has some wetlands. It has a reservoir and a pond. And Father Michael's been there numerous times. And it's a beautiful piece of property. And so a lot of this appreciation and gratitude was taken from those experiences and put into the book. And I'll also quickly add that when Father Michael talks about appreciation, the qualities of each day, and we tend to forget and take them for granted. Our tribe has one of the most sacred dances to us. It's called the sun dance. And in the sun dance, we fast for usually 3 days, sometimes 4 days without food and water. And we're required to dance in the hot sun as much as possible. It's a very, very challenging dance. It's very painful. It pushes you to the limit. The only way you get through it is by calling upon the Lord, of course, and the power of your spirit. The power that God placed in your spirit is what gets you through that dance. And the other thing it really teaches, though, is it teaches you to appreciate, first and foremost, air, whether it's warm or cool. Air is so important. And then, of course, water. Water becomes so precious. After you complete that dance, you have a completely different understanding of the importance of water and air and food and family, because the dance pushes you to the limit where you're so desperate, you're about ready to run out. And of course, that's taboo. They'll drag you back anyway. But it pushes you to the limit where at some point you look across the way and you see your parents, your family, you see your grandparents, aunts and uncles, and you start receiving their love, and their love quells all this hurt and pain. And it gives you the strength you need to get through the next few hours of the dance and to finally get over the hump of the last day. And so it's a very, very brutal, challenging dance that teaches you to appreciate all the little things in life. And sometimes it takes something like that to teach us something, because as human beings are so stubborn, we get so arrogant, and we start to think that all of the things we receive are supposed to be granted to us without any exception, without any question. And so it's things like this that we put in the book. Father Michael's been to the dance. He's seen the suffering. So we put all that kind of information in the book to try to inspire others.
In the book, we speak about cycles. And I think as you speak about your family and the role of families supporting the dancers, you know, I think of connections with our Christian faith, the Creator, the created land, the community, the Trinity itself, our connections within our faith communities, so important. And so we've taken a cyclical way of looking at the question of gratitude. We take that as our starting point, that every day is a gift and our natural response is gratitude. And when we live in gratitude, in acknowledging our blessings and appreciating them, as you were saying, Forrest, it makes us more generous in many ways. It shifts our whole way of being with each other, being in the world, gives us a different consciousness, a different sense of what is ours and what is ours to give. And when we're in a community where generosity is a characteristic of it, it leads to a sense of abundance. Not necessarily that we get everything we need or everything we want, right? Everything that we may have a craving for because we see it around us or it's advertised on TV or something. But when people live generously, our basic needs are met and the relationships are strong and healthy. And when there's that sense of abundance in the community, it makes us more grateful. And it becomes a self-giving cycle. We call that a life-giving cycle in our book. And we treat the subjects of gratitude, generosity, and abundance. So just starting with gratitude, I mean, we're all familiar with the Apostle Paul saying, pray without ceasing, give thanks under all circumstances. What a great idea, you know, to pray all the time. And Forrest, let me just read a little bit from your beloved mentor, Jensen Jack, who was the Sundance chief. This is what Jensen said to Forrest at one point when you were a younger man. You go to church one day a week to thank God. Me, I pray and give thanks throughout the day. I wake up, thank you for the gift of this day. I drink water, eat food, give thanks again, Tueak and Ute. When I see my friends and family, I give thanks again. I live my church every day, all through the day. Tell us about Jensen, Forrest.
When I was became education director for my tribe, fresh out of college, Jensen, our Sundance chief, would show up at some of our meetings. I set up an advisory committee of community leaders or representatives that I could talk to about some of the programs and services we were providing to get their guidance and support. Well, Jensen would show up. He would sit way in the back, and he's a big man, and he's quite intimidating at first until I got to know him. And I didn't get to know him until one day he was watching me, because he never said anything. For several meetings, he was watching me. And I've come to realize that what he was trying to determine is whether I was going to be an assimilationist or a colonizer, colonializer of the people to try to displace our culture, or replace, the new term, replace Indian culture with white culture, or the culture of the dominant American society. And when he saw that what I was trying to do is take the best of both worlds and blend them together, that's when he approached me and started talking with me. And over time, he became my advisor. Not only advisor, my spiritual guide, because from then on, he began teaching me things. And he taught me experientially. For example, I would be stressed out, worried about a deadline, working on a proposal or writing something. And he would show up, and he would usually stand in the doorway with his arm like this and leaned up against the door, and he would laugh at me. And when he laughed at me, it was always, uh-oh, he's going to reveal something to me that I'm foolish about. And so he would come in and sit down and proceed to tell me a story. And at first I'm telling myself, oh, Jensen, I'm too busy. Please don't come now. Go away. Come back another time. But he would proceed to tell me the story until I started listening and internalizing the information. And then he would stand up and look at me close. He would look at my eyes deeply. And then he would laugh at me again and walk off. And all of a sudden, I would sit back and realize, oh my gosh, he reconnected me. I'm not suffering any anxiety, stress. I'm relaxed, I'm calm. And then I would focus on my work and I would finish it. I would finish it in no time. And it would be much more productive work than I'd ever thought I could produce. So what I was going to add to what Father Michael was saying earlier is that the gratitude and appreciation for things now at the moment, what it does is it puts you in the presence. It puts you in the here and now so that you're not thinking about the future. So you're not suffering anxiety, and you're not thinking about the past, the depression, or the things that are disappointing you or making you feel bad. You're focused on right now. And when you're in the now, that's when the magic happens. Like a lot of times, I don't prepare a script. Father Michael and I have been giving these talks quite often. And we don't really follow a script. We just go by whatever our spirit tells us to say. And it's because we're in the moment when we do that. And then the Lord pours forth all of the wisdom. It's really not coming from us. It's coming from the Lord, our creator, the Lord God, our Father. And so that's how it works.
Beautiful. I feel like I know Jensen Jack just from hearing your stories about him, Forrest. One little practice, a little simple thing we suggest in the book is taking some Post-it notes and writing the question, what are you thankful for? And putting them, bathroom mirror, by your coffee pot, at your desk, just to remind you what Jensen would do for Forrest to stop. I mean, we all get stressed out on our deadlines and whatever it is that we think we're supposed to be doing. And just to be able to stop a little bit and remember what we're grateful for and get that grounding that Jensen helped you find. And I'd like to come back later to gratitude journals, but that's kind of a story in itself. So moving on into the story of the Ute people, there are several different bands, a number of different bands. We're in the Ute Indian tribe in Northeast Utah. Forrest is an enrolled member. And the people of this tribe were forcibly removed from their homelands in two parts of Colorado, and Forrest's family people from south of Salt Lake City. From these, you've described these different areas as like versions of the promised land, and brought to this more desolate, high desert place where there was, some history of the people passing through, but it wasn't anybody's homeland. And this was after the Civil War. It was a terribly traumatic time for the Ute people, just being pushed out of their homelands. And here's what Forrest and I wrote about that in the book. Being banished from the only place they had known must have been traumatic, but the Utes stayed deeply connected with the Creator and always took care of one another. They shared everything from food to caring for the young and old to providing lodging and other needs. Possessions were held in common, and if anyone had food, then everyone ate. Sharing was not just something they did, it was who they were, their way of life. Faithfulness and generosity were among their most important survival skills. Now, isn't that interesting to think of faithfulness and generosity as survival skills? The dominant culture has a real different idea about what we need to survive, right? And Forrest, I just love how in that you've sketched out that community ethic of generosity and mutual caring.
In the book, we reference Carlos Barrios, who's a pretty well-known anthropologist. He's a Mayan Indian, and he was adopted into the tribe, and he learned a lot about Native people and traveled the entire Western Hemisphere. And one of his observations was that there's one central value to all the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and that is the value of generosity. Sharing is primary, number one value of the Native people, indigenous people, even to this day. Although some of the materialistic influences of the dominant cultures are starting to distort that to some extent. Most of the time, the traditionalists remind the Indian people of the importance of keeping generosity and sharing and reciprocity high in their value system.
There's a tremendous amount of trauma in the Ute communities. Families have been disrupted in so many ways. There's a whole generation of young adults, parents of many children who alcohol, drugs, other traumas have really thrown them off course. And one of the longstanding ministries of our church is an expressive arts program we do with children and youth, inviting them to express themselves verbally and through art, gathering them into healthy communities and offering mentors, good healthy food, outdoor exercise. That's our offering back to the community. And we find that, I don't know, maybe half the kids we work with are living with their grandparents. The grandmothers, we have 3 great grandmothers in our church who are raising young children. They are so generous. They will never let a child go get lost. And, I think about some of the teachings of our Christian faith. Let the little children come to me. Whatever you did for the least of my people. This again it's not a hard taken decision. It's just a way of being together. The elders are so generous in that way. And Forrest, you described your Uncle Billy, but to bring it into some of our present day companions, Leo Tapoof and his blessings, Jane Thompson and her ministry in the county jail. I mean, in the midst of a lot of challenge and trauma and apparent scarcity on the surface, there's a strong, generous impulse in the Ute community.
Yeah, before I speak to that, Father, I wanted to mention, I forgot to give examples of our present day generosity. Rarely do we have a ceremony without a feast, right, Father?
Yeah, yeah.
We have a bear dance at the end. We have a feast, the sun dance, the feast. Sometimes
Funeral?
after,
A funeral?
Funerals. So there's always a sharing. Up in the Northwest, it's potlatch ceremonies. So there's always food, there's always sharing, a part of almost every ceremony that's conducted. So there's some of that generosity that is still practiced by our people today. And I hope that it will continue from this day forward. Regarding my Uncle Billy Chapoose, the generosity was interwoven in the culture. It's how he lived his life that influenced me the most. My great uncle, he didn't drink alcohol until he was, it's like he was in his 80s and 90s. And then he would have a beer over town when my mother would take him Friday night to a hotel in Roosevelt, the town nearby, and he would put his duffel bag away and he would walk down to the street to the beer parlor, and he would go in. The bartender would set up a beer and he would sit and watch the boys play pool. And they would come and talk with him, and no one bothered him. The bartender watched over him, and he would have maybe 2 beers at the most. And then he would walk back to his room. Same thing Saturday. And Sunday, we would come and take him home. And I watched my great uncle, the way he lived his life, and he seemed to live a life of balance. He would take the best of both worlds. He was a good, honest, spiritual man. And Jenny, one of our elders, was telling me that on the ranch that I presently live on, he had a barn in the middle of the field, beautiful green grassy property. And in this barn in the spring, he would bring all the singers in, and they would practice songs. They would practice the bear dance songs. They would practice the Sundance songs. They would practice songs for social dances, circle, called the circle dance we do.
Round dance.
Round dance, yeah, they call it round dance. They'd also practice powwow songs, which were before that time called war dance songs. So my great uncle, he was responsible for getting everyone prepared for the ceremonial season, the coming spring and summer, all of these dances that were held throughout the year. And he was a firekeeper for the Sundance. So he was central to keeping our culture going. And as I said, he didn't drink. He had a wife. He had a brother. He took care of his family. He lived well. And he told my mom to never give up our land, always keep it within the family and eventually within the tribe, but keep it in the family, never sell it outside the reservation or to non-Indian people. So those were principles and values that were ingrained in my being. And so he was such an influence on my life. I've tried to replicate who he was and follow his his guidance. And so I feel his spirit on this land. This ranch is so beautiful. I have, I counsel people here. I have a sweat lodge here for ceremonies. I do equine therapy. I call it horse medicine. That's my word for it. And so I use this ranch as a healing place. And I've named it Uinta Springs Ranch because there are springs along the hillside that feed into the wetlands. And so the spirit of my great Uncle Billy is here on this land, and I try to emulate it as much as possible.
Forrest, you've taught me some about the history of that land. So after the Civil War, the 3 bands of Ute people were forcibly removed to this high desert basin where we are now and kind of dumped there. 30 years later, the Mormons in Salt Lake City discovered that this basin has one of those precious Western resources, water. There are 2 rivers coming down out of the mountains that join together just below our town of White Rocks. And so the Dawes Act was passed that took away, I was about to say stole back, 2/3 of the reservation and parceled it out to homesteaders. And so we are all surrounded by 4th generation Mormon ranching families who are, you know, they're fine people, they work hard, but the history is brutal. And the tribe had always held everything in common. And that act broke tribal land up into these little parcels. Your ranch today, Uncle Billy's land, was a portion of that. Uncle Billy was a peace officer, really working for restorative justice in the community. And he saw people all the time drinking whiskey, trading their parcel of land for what? You know, for a gun, for a horse, for some bottles of whiskey. And so that's what led him to that commitment that you've just described, to keep the land in the family and that sense of sacredness, that the practicing those songs not only supported the community celebrations for the whole year, but it embodied and expressed the sacredness of the land. So you, Forrest, in your time, and your son and your grandson and daughter, you know, are inheritors of this. And in our section about abundance in the book, we talk about the process of building the house you're sitting in right now, up on the 2nd floor in your open office, looking out at the windows at the pond. I can just picture that view. You got to recognize one thing about building a house on the reservation. There are no mortgages. The title companies won't have anything to do with this land that's held in federal trust. And so tell us about how you came to have a house there, Forrest.
Yeah, after I was fired by the governor of the state of Utah for doing my job, I was fired for political reasons. I was trying to protect a 3,000-year-old archaeological site along with the state anthropologist or archaeologist. And we were both following the antiquities law. And we kept telling the governor, these folks are violating it. And so the big money people got basically influenced the governor to let us go. So we were fired. After I came back to the reservation, the land here didn't have a home on it. And so I didn't have a lot of retirement money saved up. And my wife and I had split up. And so half of the money from the sale of the house I was living on. And so I'd learned about the creative visualization. And so I got a poster and I put in the middle of it, I wanted a granddaughter. So I cut out a picture of this Indian man holding a little girl. And I cut out a 2-story house and stuck it on there, and a pickup and a garden and some other things. Long story short, they all came true. I had a grandson at the time, but I wanted a granddaughter. And the Lord granted me this beautiful, beautiful granddaughter. Arden Grace is her name, Arden Grace. And she comes and stays with me from time to time, and we just have a great time. And then, of course, I came into some money various times. I made certain investments, and long story short, I ended up with a beautiful, beautiful home here. My truck was getting old. I found one with no interest. I was able to buy that. Long story short, everything I have was granted to me through the power of prayer and meditation and faith. And so I have this beautiful place here, and it's a gift from God. And my mother and father, my great uncle, aunts, all of my ancestors are part of where we are today. And so I also pray for healing, because there's such a thing as trauma, historical trauma. All the horrible things that happened in the past sometimes get passed down. And so then it manifests itself in the form of alcohol, drugs, dysfunctional behavior, sexual abuse, things like that. And so that's why I offer my ranch as a healing place, is to help people get rid of that trauma. Okay. It's a very, very deep subject. We could talk about it for hours and days. But that's really what it comes down to, is helping people.
And we're blessed to be serving a wonderful church that serves the whole community around us. Forrest is the bishop's warden, the senior warden. I'm the vicar. And we have a wonderful mixture of elders and young adults and teenagers and kids. We're not large in numbers, but we have such a passion for serving the community and such an impact, I think, in the community. It's really, really fun. There are a couple of things I'm thinking of in our creative arts program when the pandemic came, and we couldn't keep gathering together in person. And the youth leader of that program decided that she and her nieces, who were all part of one household, 3 young women in high school at the time, would start making lunches for the families in the program. That was, we always provide a meal every time we get together in the arts program. So they started providing lunches, and then they figured, well, it's better to deliver the lunches than to have everybody gathering. This is in the pre-vaccination days, right? So they ended up preparing and delivering 2,000 lunches during a particular school year. And this is in a small community. I mean, it really made a difference for people. And they would take them at first for the kids we knew were in the program, but they had younger siblings and aunties and grandmas living in the, so it took twice as many lunches per household as we thought. But it just was something that we could do. And I would write about it in our newsletter and include pictures, and people would send us money without ever being asked. As fast as we could spend the money on the pay for our youth leader and the materials for the lunches, more of it came in. So somehow, amazingly, she is now our halftime youth and outreach project coordinator. And I just sat down and met with her yesterday, and she is overwhelmed with ideas of possibilities. She has gotten the idea that if we're generous, starting with being thankful and then we're generous, that there will be an abundance of opportunities to be of service and abundance of resources to carry it out. And we just feel so blessed in our church. And the elders.
Don't forget too, though, you remember we had that big discussion in church about, we were discussing all the problems we had, the alcohol, the drug abuse, the violence. And you entertained that discussion with the whole parish, the congregation, about what can we do? And it was the elders, a lot of the elders came forth and said, we need to work with the young people. We need to focus on the young people. And so when you called the bishops committee meeting, we confirmed that and said, well, the elders have spoken and they've said we need to, the most effective way to change things in our community is with the youth. And so that's what we focused on. And Father Michael's just done a wonderful job of building up that program. And we've faced some real adversity at times, and we have not allowed that to stop us.
It's been so much fun. We serve dozens and dozens of young people in the community. At one point, 3 years ago, we made an appointment with the tribal council, and they were kind of tense because they were sure we were going to ask them for money.
Yeah.
And no, we just wanted to tell them all the stuff we were doing, and they got so excited. They just got so enthusiastic about. They could feel what's in our hearts behind being of service. I mean, folks, this is a congregation with an ASA of 20 or 25, you know. We do receive very generous financial support from our diocese, very generous. But, you know, we don't take that for granted. We use that in service of the community. And maybe my favorite thing I've gotten to do in the whole time is just lift up and encourage the leaders from within the community who are ready to do stuff. And we just have a whole variety of homegrown leaders who are really engaged in the community.
Father Michael and Forrest, I think this is a great moment while you're talking about your congregation and the struggles and the joys there, to shift so that we can ask you some questions.
Sure.
You certainly have laid the groundwork of a triune stewardship plan that moves from gratitude to generosity and to abundance. And that's a word we use a lot in our diocese. That's celebrating God's abundance is the bishop's tagline. So we talk about that quite a bit here too. So I'm going to start first. Everybody else, you can raise your virtual hand when you're ready to ask a question and unmute yourself. But I'm curious about what stewardship looks like in an Episcopal church on a reservation.
Well, to begin with, 30 years ago, the Diocese of Utah sold a hospital that had been established in the earliest days of white settlement in Utah. And we have an abundant bank of money at the diocesan level. And God bless the diocese, a long-standing policy of earmarking the most generous grants for Latino congregations, a South Sudanese congregation, and our 2 native congregations. So we receive very generous support. But we build on that. And one time I made some pledge cards. I'd been here about 1.5 years. I made some pledge cards and I showed them to one of our elders, Leo Tapuf. And he looked at them and he looked at me. It was one of the first times people in the congregation really told me the truth. He said, Indians don't sign cards like that. So what I do is I just keep telling the stories. We publish a wonderful newsletter. We have a wonderful graphic artist who volunteers her time. We tell the stories, we share the photos. Every issue is just filled with stories about how we are blessed and how we are becoming blessings for the community around us. And the giving of the members of the congregation is increased, and we've developed a giving community around us. When those young women were doing those lunches, the local funeral director heard about it. He does almost all the Native funerals. It's a really important role, and he's very sensitive to the local community. He just sent a check for $1,000. He said, let me know when you need more. You know that saying, money follows mission? I think it's the stories. It's knowing that we're making an impact and connecting it with our faith. I mean, we do this because we're good people, but we mainly do it because we follow Jesus. And this is how he lived. This is who he is and who we try to be as his disciples.
Beautiful. Who has a question for Michael or for Forrest?
Maybe I could tell you about gratitude journals, how I encountered those. I was serving in Colorado, south suburbs of Denver, and we had a big youth group in that church. And there was a terrible school shooting just down the street from us, a couple blocks down the street. 2 students died. It was awful. It was deeply traumatic. And every kid in every school heard about it in 5 minutes. They're all texting each other. All the families were traumatized. But what we noticed was that the people who'd been in the community for more than 10 years, who'd gone through the Columbine high school shootings, they carried a residual trauma that was triggered by that event and were even more deeply affected than people like me who had come more recently, I felt strongly connected. I knew lots of kids who were in that school. I heard their stories. But Forrest, you've taught me so much about historical or inherited trauma. And in this case, we're just talking over a period of 10, 15 years. For Native and African-American people, it goes back for generations and generations. So, there were all the responses with counselors and community gatherings, candlelight vigils. The governor spoke at the funeral, one of the funerals. A year after the shootings, I got a call from one of the school counselors saying they would like to make a response to this event. They'd like to have it off campus, but not too far and in a big enough gathering space. So I said, sure, you can use our church. So students, faculty, and parents packed the church, 300 or 400 people. And a professor from Duke University came and said, there are 2 things I know that are really helpful in recovering from trauma. One is getting enough sleep. The other is being intentional about expressing your gratitude. And he got us all, he set up online portals for this. Every one of us who wanted one had an opportunity to go online every day and write down 3 things that we were grateful for from that day. And not just like my family, but something more specific that we had engaged with in that day. And he, through previous studies, he said 6 months, if you do this for 6 weeks, I can pick you out of a control group in 6 months just by expressing your gratitude every night before you go to bed. And you need to write it down, he said. Just saying the words doesn't set it in you as much as if you write it down. What a powerful practice. I'm not as systematic with it anymore, but if you look at our book at the end, I just make these little jotted notes. I have special notebooks where I write this down. I have years of accumulations of little teasers of stories of wonderful things that have happened in the congregation. And it just, when things get stressful, you know, like they do in church sometimes, coming back to these stories of gratitude lift me up every time.
We have a couple of hands up. Dave Westner.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Forrest and Michael, for presenting. In listening to both of you, and in particular in what you were sharing, Forrest, I'm really I'm wondering if you might say a little bit more about connection with the land, with creation, and how a lived experience of that in community informs generosity. And as you've been doing this work, how have you found ways, or maybe Michael, you have found ways for folks who have, you know, grown up in the dominant culture and white culture, in particular in urban or suburban culture, in our case, how to engage with the land in a way that is wholesome, healing, restorative, and then cultivates that generosity.
Forrest, you need to unmute.
Okay. As I said earlier, I have been blessed with this land I inherited from my great uncle. And during the pandemic, I didn't suffer a lot of what I saw on television with numerous people. And I attribute that to being connected to this beautiful place. I would go outside quite often. I would connect with not only the land, but all the animals, the birds especially. And I would connect every day. And I would always give thanks for that, because my great uncle taught us that. And so the key is connection with nature. And I also learned that from Jensen. And so I was asked one time, what do you think is the cause of a lot of the problems in the world? And immediately my spirit told me, it's disconnection from God the Father. It's disconnection from creation, which the Lord is in. The Lord is the earth. The Lord is the birds, the animals. The Lord's Spirit is within. And when we disconnect from those things, that's when we invite problems into our lives. One time I was in high school visiting my aunt, and I was kind of smarting off to her. I said, Aunt Margie, I don't believe in God. And boy, did she get on me. She said, what do you mean? And I knew I was in trouble then. And she said, you take a look around here. What do you see? I said, yeah, the trees, the grass and everything. And she said, did you create that? No, someone created that. And she really got on me and says, "Who do you think you are?" So the Lord is in those things, and the Lord is within your spirit. Don't come around here talking to me this way. And he put me in my place. And aunts and uncles are the ones who do that, by the way. In the Indian culture, if you get out of line, your uncle's going to come around. If you're in the house acting up, your aunt's going to get on you. But I remember to this day what she told me, because I loved and respected her so much. And so that is my answer. Is connection with all of creation. And I think that is what has contributed to the problems in our country right now. People, the dominant world looks at the earth and the resources as an asset, okay, something to be invested in and exploited, rather than something of beauty, something that is powerful and needs to be appreciated. And that doesn't mean that we can't use resources. It's how we use them. If we use them in a destructive way, then it is going to attract darkness. And you might benefit from the wealth at first, but eventually the darkness will follow. And so our country has gotten to the point where we have exploited the earth so much that we're now starting to pay the consequences, the karma of our destruction. And what it has led to is our own destruction. The central to all of that is the opposite of generosity, which is greed and selfishness. Right now, I think, Father Michael, you made the point in the book about during the pandemic, we saw the emergence of the most billionaires ever in the history of this country, the creation of the 1% versus the rest of us, the 98. And it's caused such a division in this country. The politics have followed that. And again, it's disconnection. And disconnection leads to disconnection from each other. So we do not see our sacredness. We only see our political beliefs, and if we don't like them, then we attack them. We don't see a human being sitting next to us unless he belongs to our party. See, all of that is destroying our sacredness as a community. And we don't have that in our little church community.
Well, I think one of the most radical things about following Jesus and being in the church is that we belong to each other. I mean, that just doesn't play in the main culture, right? People want their personal savior. They want their individual spiritual path. It's a radical thing to really be committed to one another. What a blessing. Elliot, you had a question. Are you still there?
No, I'm afraid he just bid us adieu. I've
I'm
never
sorry.
seen an hour go so quickly, gentlemen,
Oh,
but we're just about at time. So I'm going to turn this over again to our bishop.
Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I'm going to be in your area the last week of June. I'm an advisor to the Cyrus Dallin Museum in Arlington. And so if any of you find yourself in that area, just know that that's where I'll be. I've been advising them on some of their exhibits there. And so I have some good friends in that area. So I just thought I'd make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Michael and Forrest. Thank you. You're truly an inspiration. Thank you for this hour you've spent with us. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, stay with us, for evening is at hand and the day is past. Be our companion in the way, kindle our hearts, and awaken hope, that we may know you as you are revealed in Scripture and the breaking of bread. Grant this for the sake of your love. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
Bye now.